Hey guys, Tyler Ansman here with Tyler Ansman Performance. So today what we're going to talk about are the variety of purposes that we can use mound-focused sessions for. All right, every time you step on the mound, it's not necessarily a high-intensity session. So depending on the microcycle layout, the goal of that training cycle, the needs of the athlete, etc., we can have a variety of purposes for these mound-focused sessions. Okay, so let's talk about our first type of mound-focused training session. The first one is a velocity development session, okay? So this one, a couple of the parameters are, it's a high-intensity session, okay? So this means basically we're trying to get the most potent velocity-related stimulus we can from this session. So that means the highest possible numbers we can get to on the radar gun. That's going to give us the greatest adaptation. So in order to keep that intensity very high and get the most from this, our volume needs to be low. So this volume can be pre-planned ahead of time, but within the session you may need to make adjustments. So really the optimal way to kind of plan a session like this, if you can, is to auto-regulate it. So set kind of a drop-off point, and if velocity dips below that kind of set percentage of the day's top velocity, generally if we're doing a max intense session, it's going to be like a 2% drop off, not a whole lot more than that. So if it drops below that, you'll cut the session there even if more volume was planned. And on the other side of that coin, if the athlete is prepared for it and you're not giving them this kind of huge bump up in volume for that session, if they don't drop in intensity, you may have a hard cutoff, but you may let them go a little bit extra than you were kind of originally planning. All right. The other option here is that depending on the athlete and their needs, you can use overload and underload implements here as part of that kind of high intensity stimulus on that mound focus session. So the second type of mound focus session is an efficiency development session. Okay. So what we're trying to do is get comfortable throwing hard at an easier effort level. Okay, so as far as the parameters go, it's going to be moderate to moderate high intensity. Okay, so we may get up to about a 9 RPE, but we're not really going to go above that. Much above that, we start getting into the velocity development type of session. Okay, so we want to stay below that level, and it's going to be moderate volume. Okay, we can handle a little bit more volume than we can in the velocity development session because the intensity is not quite as high. The other piece to this is this can be gamified in the form of velo horseshoes, kind of as you've seen me talk about in the past. But there are a variety of ways you can do this as well. So one way may be you have a given velocity range and they have to stay in that range at the lowest possible RPE, okay? The other one would be you have a given RPE and they try to reach the highest velocity they possibly can. And then a third option would be you kind of waive the intensity in that session. So maybe, for example, you stair step the velocity. So you start off easy, then you go easy medium, then you go medium, trying to kind of beat that velocity each time. Similar idea to the PFA plus 1 mile per hour bullpen idea that they sometimes use. So the third type of mound focus session that we'll often use is a patterning focus session, okay? So parameters here, low to moderate intensity, all right? And moderate to high volume. So because of that intensity, we can get a pretty good amount of exposure to these patterns that we're trying to work on. So often kind of the way this will look, we'll have a drill or a series of drills, whether they're field-based drills, throwing drills, or a mix of both, that we're kind of trying to blend to the full pattern, right? So we're kind of chunking that pattern, getting exposure to that, and then trying to take those feels and those movement changes into kind of the full deal. So this session will look a little bit different depending on the time of year, whether we're actually blending to the full pitching delivery, whether we're actively mixing in off-speed pitches or anything like that, or whether we're blending to maybe a kind of modified full delivery where we're doing maybe a step back type of deal, a modified walking wind, something along those lines. The farther away from competition, the more we can do things like that, and the less very, very specific we have to be. Closer we get to competition, the more specific we'll often be with this. Okay, so this is one of the lower kind of stress options as far as that goes. A good amount of exposure to the patterning changes that we need, and this is the third option that we'll use, a patterning focused mound session. So the fourth type of mound focus session that we'll often use is a command focus session, okay? So moderate to moderate high intensity here, because we need kind of this kind of minimum intensity baseline, generally around like an 8 RPE or so, to give us good transfer to game-like situations, because we're not going to be throwing at a 5 RPE in a game scenario. We need to be at a reasonably high intensity. Again, not a velocity development session, so it doesn't necessarily need to be full effort, but we do need moderate to moderate high intensities there, okay? So then moderate to moderate high volumes as well are generally acceptable here. It will also depend on the specific athlete and how well they tolerate this and recover from it, and if there are any other kind of goals in that cycle that we're also trying to kind of balance with. So what you'll want to do with these type of sessions, make sure that you're tracking balls and strikes, for example. If you just have a command trainer, that's probably a fine thing to track. You can get more specific with the command metrics that you're tracking. For example, if you have kind of a 9-hole, strike zone type of thing that you're throwing into, you could track how often you actually hit the 1 of 9 that you're going for, okay? So you can get a little bit more specific with that. You can use off-speed pitches as well, and should. You want to kind of track those when you're looking for kind of the weak points in command. So this is good if you have somebody who has pretty good stuff, struggles with the ability to throw strikes, and isn't getting time related to that. If this is their biggest area of opportunity, this may be a really good place to kind of focus. All right, so the fifth and kind of like final broad category we'll discuss today of our mound focus sessions will be a pitch design session, okay? So parameters here, moderate to moderate high intensity, okay? Again, we want this to kind of transfer over to game scenarios. So we're not throwing these at 50% effort. Again, not a velocity development session, so it's not going to be at full effort necessarily, because we are going to need a pretty good amount of exposure to this, so that means kind of moderate to high volumes here. So in order to be able to do that, we can't do this at full intensity and get the frequency of exposure to this stimulus that we're going to need, okay? So for this type of session, ideally you're going to have a couple of things. One, a slow motion camera of some type, so we can see kind of what the fingers and hand are doing at ball release, okay? And then two, you're going to have a Rapsodo or a TrackMan, so we can track those kind of ball flight metrics, and then experiment with changes along those lines to kind of shape the pitch and pitch profile kind of to be the way we want it to be. You can also do this with like an older school method. It's not that old school, but you can mark up a ball with like a Sharpie, and then you can use the slow motion camera on your cell phone to kind of see what those kind of flight metrics are looking like in a broader sense, but it can give you an idea of kind of how to shape those pitches if you don't have access to a Rapsodo or a TrackMan. That can work well as well. So this is kind of good for a guy who has pretty decent velocity, obviously all right command, and the last piece is kind of rounding out that arsenal and making this work for them in terms of pitchability in game scenarios. Maybe they need to develop a vertical breaking type of pitch because they already have an arsenal that's well rounded outside of that. This would be a good type of session to work on that. But again, you're going to have to kind of narrow down your goals when we're deciding on how to use all of these sessions, because they can't all necessarily go together in a cycle just because of the nature of the differences in intensity and volumes required for these various goals. All right, so these are just a couple examples of mound focus sessions. There are certainly more options than this, but these are kind of the 5 like broadest categories that we'll use here at TAP. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them below. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the website if you're interested in remote training. Thanks.